Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 309. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, April 1st, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Saturday, April 1st, April Fool's Day. There will be no April Fool's jokes on the podcast today. So everything I'm saying is nothing's a joke. It's all for real. I thought about doing something for April Fool's Day, but here's the thing. This isn't a live show. This is a podcast. And while I'm recording it on the morning of April Fool's Day, the vast majority of you will not be listening to it on April Fool's Day. It'll be sometime after that. And the aura of a April Fool's joke tends to tarnish a bit after the fact. So we're not playing any of those silly games today. Topic of today's podcast, the Alice Cooper you never knew. Yeah, that guy, Alice Cooper, the godfather of glam rock, shock rock, say whatever you will. Alice Cooper is a true rock pioneer. That's just not me saying it. There's a endless list of people who believe that. He's touring today, 75 years after he started. I mean, the guy has been in the business well over 50 years and still does a good show, according to the reviewers. I've not seen his show. I have not seen his show since the 70s when he did the Welcome to My Nightmare tour. Me and a buddy of mine went to see his show at what was it called then? The Checker Dome, the arena? I forget. It was either the Checker Dome or the arena back then. But that was one of those days where it was on a weeknight. We went and saw Alice Cooper's show, stayed up late, got up the next morning and went to work, and we were just fine. A long, long time ago. But Alice Cooper, the Alice Cooper you never knew, is the topic of today's essay. Before we get into the life and times and accomplishments of Alice Cooper, a couple of updates for you. A update on the 1951 Jaguar Mark VII. Folks, I think we're finally getting close to being, I'm not going to say done with the car, but done with the outside services on the car. Now, just to walk you back, for about 2 years now, I've been working on this car. It was my father's. He bought it some 55 years ago or so. Was in the process of raising 6 children with my mother, so basically bought it, drove it a little bit, parked it in the garage for 55 years. I then inherited it from my dad and got it. I rented a shop, took everything apart, gave it to a guy to do the body work, the painting, rebuild the engine, install the engine. And that's been a year and a half, at least, maybe more. Bottom line is we're about done. They put I was out at the shop earlier this week, saw the engine run. The engine runs beautifully. I posted a short video of the engine running on my Facebook page, so take a look at it if you want to. And this is the reason I did it the way I did it. Most people who restore this type of car, when you say classic Jaguar, you think the XKEs. Those are the ones that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you can put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the car and still sell it for a profit. Well, this car will never be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. This car fully restored is worth tens of thousands of dollars, maybe, because it's not the car the collectors want. That's okay. I'm not a collector. I'm not buying the car. I did not get the car to enter into contests and win trophies. I got the car because to finish my father's work, to have the car and to work on it with him, to get him to drive in it, and it'll be a keepsake for the family. That's why I got the car. But I wanted to put the original engine back into it. Most people restore cars like this because they're not worth much financially, because they can't resell them. They throw 350 Chevy engines into them, which there's nothing wrong with a 350 Chevy engine. It just doesn't belong on a 1951 Jaguar Mark 7, okay? And a 350 Chevy engine certainly sounds sweet, but it doesn't sound like a straight six 3.4 liter Jaguar engine with a cast iron block and dual overhead cams, aluminum. It just doesn't sound like that. And this car just sounds like a Jaguar. I've even got specially made exhaust system coming from England. It's not here yet, but when it comes here, I'll put that thing on and it will sound the same as it did when it came off the factory floor in 1951. So hopefully, 1 week from today, I will have that car in my shop. Hopefully. The goal is to get that thing moved from the shop where they're working to my shop so I can continue the restoration. The goal is to do that next Friday. So we'll see if that happens. We've had delays before. We may have more delays. Who knows? Also, I've mentioned before, generally in the wintertime, I pick up a topic that I like to read about. And this time I read about some of the old Hollywood actors from the golden era, okay? And I've most of them have died. In fact, virtually all of them have, all but one. I've read books on Sophia Loren, Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra, Tim Conway, Debbie Reynolds. There's others I can't think of, but those are the main. I mean, I'm currently reading one about Bob Hope. I got a book a couple weeks ago on Orson Welles, and it's the only one that I stopped reading. And when authors, let me give an editorial on biographical authors. A good biographer will take the life of an individual and tell the story. And they'll tell the story not necessarily in a way that is flattering, but you got to tell the story in a way that's truthful. This Orson Welles book that I read was just bizarre beyond belief. I gave it 100 pages, okay? The book was written by a guy who, according to the sleeve, his biggest accomplishment is he was one of the first public figures to come out as gay in the 1980s. I thought, okay, where's this going to go? If being gay is your biggest accomplishment, or telling people that you are is your biggest accomplishment, that raises the flag right there. Well, this book just goes into great detail about how Orson Welles did gay things. Not that he was gay, but he did gay things. And by the age of 16, this author had Orson Welles using his sexual influence on gay men to get ahead. No sex, just the sexuality of a 16-year-old, just beguiling all these gay men to give him special treatment. And I thought, you know what? This isn't a biographer. This is a guy with an agenda. I don't know what it is. And I closed the book and I returned it. The first of the books that I just stopped reading. I'm not going to read something like that because I want to read a biography about a great man. Orson Welles certainly was one of the finest actors, directors, writers, artists, go on, that ever lived. And this guy basically, to coin a phrase that's going to make people upset, he basically he gayed it up. And I wasn't going to read it because it wasn't telling me anything about the guy. It was telling me it was a bunch of suggestive stuff that may have happened according to this guy who didn't ever know, and I don't doubt that ever spoke with Orson Welles. So anyway, no more Orson Welles book, but I'm doing the Bob Hope book. And this may be the last one because, I do it during the winter time, and spring is finally upon us. Anyway, let's get into the topic of today's podcast. The Orson Welles, the Alice Cooper you never knew. No, his parents did not name him Alice Cooper, of course. His parents named him Vincent Furnier. Vincent Damon Furnier. He was born in 1948. His rock career have spanned over 5 decades. He's in his 6th decade of working. So let's see, let's count 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, teens, 20s. This is his 7th decade of working. He's got the raspy voice, and his stage show features numerous props and stage illusions like pyrotechnics, guillotines, electric chairs, fake blood, reptiles, baby dolls, and dueling swords. Cooper is considered by many to be the godfather of shock rock. How did he come up with these ideas? He drew from horror films, vaudeville, and garage rock to pioneer a macabre and theatrical brand of rock designed to simply shock the audience, okay? Now, Alice Cooper, the band, originated in Phoenix, Arizona, okay? And it consisted of Vincent Furnier, was not yet known as Alice Cooper, Vincent Furnier on lead vocals and harmonica. The four other guys in the band, they called their band Alice Cooper, and Furnier eventually adopted it to his stage pseudonym. They released their first album in 1969, but in 1970 had the breakout single I'm 18. And their third studio album, Love It to Death, that's when the band reached commercial success. Actually, that was in 1973 with their album Billion Dollar Babies. That's when he hit the big time in 1973. Now, after the band broke up, Furnier legally changed his name to Alice Cooper and began a solo career in 1975. In fact, that was a big deal. He started that in 1975 with the Welcome to My Nightmare album and tour. And the Welcome to My Nightmare tour is the one that I saw with a buddy of mine. He sold over 50 million records since the time he started. So when I say Alice Cooper, I'm usually talking about the man. Occasionally when I say Alice Cooper, I'm talking about the band. Cooper experimented with numerous musical styles: hard rock, glam rock, heavy metal, glam metal, new wave. He did industrial rock, art rock. He did a little bit of everything. But then when you work through into 7 decades, that's going to happen. He helped to shape the sound and look of heavy metal. He's been described as the artist who first introduced horror imaginary to rock and roll, and whose stagecraft and showmanship have permanently transformed the genre. He's also known for his offstage wit. The Rolling Stone album guide called him the most beloved heavy metal entertainer out there. Now, away from music, like most artists, Cooper's an actor, a golfing celebrity with, once upon a time, he was darn near a scratch golfer. He's a restaurateur. And he also is a disc jockey. He's got a radio show since 2004 called Nights with Alice Cooper. Still going live, syndicated nationwide. His father was an evangelist. In fact, he was not just an evangelist, but he was an evangelist in the Church of Jesus Christ. They used to also be called the Bickertonites. And the Church of Jesus Christ is a kind of like a branch of Mormonism. It's not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but just the Church of Jesus Christ. They used the writings in the books of Joseph Smith, the books of Mormon, as part of their faith. Okay, and in fact, his paternal grandfather, Thurman Furnier, was what they called an apostle back in 1917, and he was president of the Church of Jesus Christ between 1963 and 1965. So his grandfather was the equivalent of the Pope of the Church of Jesus Christ. So he had a big-time religious influence in his family. Now, back in 1964, Cooper, Furnier, he wanted to enter a high school talent contest, okay? And there was a group of guys who he ran cross country with. They decided to enter the contest, and they won first prize, and everybody loved them. And these were just 5 buddies from school. And because of the overwhelming response they got from the audience, and because of the fact that they won the talent show, they thought, you know what? Let's try to just do this and be a rock band. There was one problem, though. Of the 5 people in the group, only one knew how to play a musical instrument. They just kind of faked it, okay? So what they did is, okay, let's get some musical instruments. They went to a pawn shop. They decided who's going to play what, bought musical instruments, learned how to play them, and then started to tour locally while still in high school. Fernier Cooper did lead vocals. In 1966, they called themselves the Spiders, by the way. That was their band name. They graduated from Cortez High School, and they then released an album, Don't Blow Your Mind. And actually, they had a number one hit, a local Arizona number one hit, okay, back then. But by 1967, the band had begun to play regular road trips to Los Angeles. In fact, they called themselves, what did they call themselves? They called themselves the Spiders, but then they changed their name to Naz, okay? They thought that was a trickier name. They then had to take that name away because there was another guy who had a band called Naz. His name was Todd Rundgren. They thought, you know what? Todd Rundgren is a bigger deal than us, and we don't need to be ripping this guy off, so let's change the name of our band again. But Fernier said, look, we're not great musicians. We need some type of a gimmick, okay? So they chose a name Alice Cooper because it sounded like very innocent and wholesome in contrast to the band's image and type of music they played, because they still played this horror rock, this glam rock, this shock rock. So they picked a name called Alice Cooper because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have a name that was opposite of what the band stood for. How did they come up with the makeup? Well, one of the band's all-time favorite movies was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. That was a 1962 film that starred Bette Davis. And in the movie, Bette Davis wears this disgusting caked makeup smeared all over her face. And underneath her eyes, she has this deep, dark, black eyeliner. Yeah, that's where he got it from. In another movie the band watched and liked over and over was Barbarella. That was with, what's her face? Jane Fonda. And they just took a little bit off of that. Another show they liked was The Avengers. And they thought that the Emma Peel character, who was the woman on there who wore the black tights and gloves, they thought that was cool. So they stole a little bit from the costume of Emma Peel from The Avengers. And that's how they came up with their gig, their uniform, their brand, okay? It was just a thing that they did. They were touring in Los Angeles, and one night they had it was a disastrous gig. Okay, it was at the Cheetah Club in Venice, Los Angeles, and the band was so bad that the band emptied the entire room of patrons after just playing for 10 minutes. But they were unique. They were unique in a way that was almost there, but not quite. And there was a guy named Shep Gordon. He was a local musical manager, and he saw them. He saw what the band's negative impact had that night, but he thought with a couple little tweaks, they could turn it around. So he gave them some ideas and then said, look, I got a guy I'd like for you guys to audition to. And if he likes you, he'll give you a record deal. His name, Frank Zappa. And Alice Cooper, the band, had an audition with Frank Zappa because Frank Zappa was looking for bizarre music acts for his new record label, Straight Records. And Frank Zappa was a bizarre guy. Now, here's the thing that impressed Frank Zappa. And I think this is a true story. I don't think it's just an urban legend. But for the audition, Frank Zappa said, okay, come to the house at 7 o'clock. We'll do an audition. These guys, the Alice Cooper band, were so anxious to do this. They showed up at his house at 7 o'clock in the morning, woke Frank Zappa up, and Frank Zappa said, what are you doing here? So, well, sir, you said to be here at 7 o'clock, and we're here. They figured it was like a 9-to-5 job at work because they were getting into the business. This impressed him so much. Cooper said, Zappa said, wow, if these guys show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, they have a good work ethic. He hired them on the spot, signed them to a 3-album deal on the spot. Now, there was another Zappa signed act called the GTOs, and they said, okay, they looked at Alice Cooper's band and they said, you know what, do things just a little bit. Take this whole Emma Peel, Barbarella, whatever happened to Baby Jane thing, and turn it into a gender bender thing. Dress yourself up, throw Barbie dolls into the mix. And they did that, and that was the new look. And they came out with their first album called Pretties to You in 1969. It was very eclectic and it featured experimental presentation of their songs with a psychedelic content. Alice Cooper's shock rock, check this out. His shock rock reputation apparently developed almost by accident. Okay, here's what happened. It was an unrehearsed stage routine. It involved Cooper, a feathered pillow, and a live chicken, and it garnered attention from the press. Now, here's what happened. The band decided to capitalize on a tabloid sensationalism, creating a new subgenre called shock rock. Here's how Cooper got into the shock rock thing. They called it the infamous chicken incident. This was at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival in September 1969, and it was totally an accident. A chicken somehow made its way onto the stage and got mixed up with the feathers and the feather pillow, and for some reason, nobody knows how it happened, but the chicken got involved in all this. And what Cooper did then, he didn't know anything about farm animals. He was a city boy. The chicken got in the way. Cooper took the chicken and figured it's a chicken, it's a bird, it can fly. So he just took it and he threw it towards the audience, thinking it would fly away. It didn't. In fact, it flew into the crowd or just dropped into the crowd. And the first few rows were occupied by people with disabilities in wheelchairs. And these people in the wheelchairs proceeded to tear the bird to pieces. Now, the next day, the incident made the front page of local newspapers, and Frank Zappa phoned Alice Cooper and said, look, the story said that you bit the head off this chicken and drank its blood on stage. Did you really do that? And Cooper said, no, I didn't do that, and then told him what actually happened. And Frank Zappa told him, look, I get it, but whatever you do, don't tell anybody that you didn't do it. So the story was that Cooper bit the head off the chicken, drank its blood, and then threw it into the audience. That's what they reported. That's not what happened, but Cooper never denied it. And that's how he got to be the big-time shock rock king. Now, despite the publicity from the chicken incident, the band's second studio album, Easy Action, didn't do much. Didn't do much at all. And around that time, actually, Cooper got fed up with California. He didn't like their act, so they went back to Michigan. And actually, their bizarre stage act was received a whole lot better by Midwestern crowds, accustomed to like a proto-punk style than California. In fact, Michigan remained their steady home base, Michigan and their home base until 1972. Cooper said, L.A. just didn't get it. He said, they were on the wrong kinds of drugs for us. They were on acid, and we basically drank beer. We fit in much more with Detroit than we did anywhere else. So they stuck around Michigan and the Midwest. Alice Cooper, the band, appeared at the Woodstock-esque Strawberry Fields Festival near Toronto back in August of 1970. The band's mix of glam and increasing violent stage theatrics stood out in stark contrast to the bearded, denim-clad hippie bands of the time. In fact, Cooper said to himself, we were into fun, sex, death, and money when everybody else was into peace and love. We wanted to see what was next. As it turned out, we drove a stake through the heart of the love generation. Another bizarre Alice Cooper quote. In autumn of 1970, the Alice Cooper, the group, teamed up with producer Bob Ezrin for the recording of the third studio album, Love It to Death. This was the final album on Straight Records contract and was the band's last chance to create a hit. And they came out with a single called I'm 18. So there they were. They were there. It reached number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100 back in early 1971. Not long after the album's release, Warner Brothers then purchased Cooper's contract from Straight Records, and they gave him a big album deal and a higher level of promotion. Love It to Death proved to be their breakthrough studio album, reaching 35 on the Billboard Top 200 album chart. It would be the first of 11 Alice Cooper group and solo albums produced by Bob Ezrin, who is widely seen as being pivotal in helping to create and develop the band's definitive sound. Now, back in the 1971 tour, the show involved mock fights, gothic torture models imposed on Cooper, the man, not the band, climaxing in a stage execution by electric chair, with the band sporting tight, sequined, Emma Peel Barbie doll-looking glam rock costumes. Cooper's androgynous stage role had developed into a villainous side, portraying the potential threat to modern society. The success of the stage, bands, and single album and their tour in 2071, in fact, they went to Europe, that provided enough encouragement for Warner Brothers to offer a brand new multi-album contract. Now, their follow-up studio album called Killer, big hit. Under My Wheels, Be My Lover, and Halo of Flies were their 3 hits off of that. Killer expanded the role of the villainous side of Cooper's androgynous stage role, with his music becoming the soundtrack to the group's morality-based stage show, and that's when he introduced the boa constrictor that went around his neck and hugged him on stage, and the murderous axe chopping of bloodied baby dolls, and the execution of Cooper at the gallows via the guillotine. Cooper was again asked about his peculiar name, and he actually told Dinah Shore on her talk show that he took the name from a Mayberry RFD character. I think he was pulling her chain. But the summer of 1972 saw the release of School's Out, which was a big deal. I remember that song big time, and I'm sure most of you do too. It was top 10 in the U.S., number 1 in the U.K. It remains a staple on classic rock stations to this day. The studio album, School's Out, reached number 2 on the U.S. charts and sold over 1 million copies. With Cooper's on-stage androgynous persona, completely replaced the brashiness and machoism of bands that solidified the success of subsequent tours in the U.S. and Europe, and it won over a certain type of devoted fans. Now, he was not a big deal everywhere, but they did have a cult following, maybe a little bit bigger than a cult following. However, in the United Kingdom, Mary Whitehouse, who was a Christian morality campaigner, persuaded the BBC to ban the video School's Out, although Whitehouse's campaign did not prevent the single from reaching number 1 in the UK. So they banned the video, but the song still made number 1. Cooper then sent her a bunch of flowers and thanked her for the publicity. Meanwhile, British Labour member, MP Leo Abse, he petitioned the House Secretary Reginald Malding to have the group banned altogether from performing in the UK. And of course, that negative publicity just amped up Alice Cooper's popularity. Billion Dollar Babies was released in 1973, became the band's most successfully studio album, reaching number 1 in both the U.S. and the UK. Elected, that was another hit. And actually, Elected was a late 1972 top 10 hit from the UK. It inspired one of the first MTV-style storyline promos that ever was made for a song. In fact, a lot of people say Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody was first. Now, the video from Elected was a full 3 years before Bohemian Rhapsody. Okay, they had 2 more number 2 hits and 2 more top 10 hits in the UK and the US. Hello Hooray and No More Mr. Nice Guy. In fact, the title track featured guest vocals by Donovan and was a hit in the US. I never knew that. A string of successful concept albums and several hit singles, the band continued their grueling schedule and toured the United States again, continued attempts by politicians to pressure groups to ban their shocking act only served as fuel to the legend of Alice Cooper. And I remember that because everybody wanted to ban him, censor him, stop him. And the more they ramped it up, the more popular the band became. In fact, I remember this controversy. The big controversy came when, during the Billion Dollar Babies tour, they actually cut the heads off of baby dolls, baby doll mannequins. Okay. That's when they introduced the guillotine. In fact, the guillotine and other stage effects were designed for the band by magician James Randi. And he was even appeared in their rock concert, the concert themselves. He played the role, James Randi played the role of the executioner. That way he was there and he could oversee the stunt. They mixed him into the concert as well. Now, the Alice Cooper, the group, had now reached its peak and was among the most viable, visible, and successful acts in the industry. Beneath the surface, however, the repetitive schedule and recording and touring had begun to take its toll on the band. That happens a lot. Muscle of Love, that was released at the end of 1973 and was the last studio album from the classic lineup band Alice Cooper. In fact, there was a song that was unsolicited, never made the album, but that was a finalist to the James Bond theme from The Man with the Golden Gun. And they ended up going with the song from Lulu instead. So Alice Cooper was runner-up to the theme from the James Bond film, Man with the Golden Gun. Never made the cut, though. Now, during this time in the 70s, Cooper founded a celebrity drinking club then called the Hollywood Vampires. And they were in the Rainbow Club and Grill in West Hollywood. And that's where this trouble started, too, with the drinking club and the drinking. Now, actually, Cooper relocated back to Los Angeles, started appearing regularly on TV shows like the Hollywood Squares. He released a greatest hit compilation. This was during the time he went from Alice Cooper the band to Alice Cooper the individual. There was a video called Good to See You Again, Alice Cooper. It consisted mainly of 1973 concert footage. It was actually released as a movie that mainly ran in drive-in theaters, didn't have much box office success. But again, he was kind of a cult classic rocker. In 1975, Cooper returned, but as a solo act. He was now Alice Cooper, the man, with a new band, not Alice Cooper, the band. That's when Welcome to My Nightmare hit the charts, and he hit the tour with the Welcome to My Nightmare tour. That's the one that I saw back in the late 70s. In fact, to avoid legal complications over the ownership of the group name, Alice Cooper had then become Furnier's legal name. In other words, his name on his name was officially Alice Cooper, okay? Now, speaking of the subject of Alice Cooper, continue as a solo object as opposed to the band, he said, look, it basically got down to the fact that the band had drawn as much as they could from each other, okay? And they were kind of just done. And there were no ill feelings. There was no bad blood. The guys just decided to go on their way, and Cooper decided to go on his own way. Because, again, these were buddies from high school. He had known these guys forever. He continued a relationship with them, got together with them occasionally, and they continued to be friends. In fact, most of them, all but one, are still alive. And occasionally they appear together. So it was a mutual breakup, which doesn't happen very often in the music industry. Then he had the song, if you remember this one, Only Women Bleed. That was a big deal. He got Vincent Price into the act before the Michael Jackson Thriller video. Vincent Price worked with Alice Cooper and was featured in some of his concert appearances. He was actually accompanied the new album and stage show. It was a television special called The Nightmare, starring Alice Cooper and Vincent Price. It aired on U.S. primetime back in April 1975. The Nightmare, it won a Grammy Award nomination for Best Long Music Video and was regarded as another groundbreaking moment in rock history. Now, adding to it all, there was a concert film called Welcome to My Nightmare that also was released on a special DVD in 2017. It went on and on and on, and Alice Cooper continued to tour, to make records. He had a problem with alcohol. He had a problem with drugs. He never stopped touring. He never stopped making records. In fact, back in the 1980s, he called them his blackout albums because he couldn't remember recording them because while he beat alcohol, he got hooked on cocaine. By the mid-'80s, he was totally clean. In fact, by 1983, he was totally clean because Cooper was hospitalized for alcohol, drug addiction, and cirrhosis of the liver. That was the wake-up call that finally got Alice Cooper to become sober. But then he never backed off of his act because it was just that. It was an act. In fact, he spent a long period in the music business dealing with personal issues, especially his drug addiction, his alcohol abuse, and marital problems. But he was on award shows. So while he stepped away from music, he was on television. He was on award shows. He was guest starring on movies and TV shows and game shows and talk shows. He still stayed active, even though he didn't actually make any albums or tour. His Constrictor album in 1986, that was his comeback. That's his first album in many years. He had a hit called He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask. That was the theme song for the movie Friday the 13th, Part 7, Jason Lives. Okay. Part of his problems, too, were marital. In fact, he's been married to, and this is kind of odd in the music industry too, married to the same woman for a long, long time. But they had problems. I mean, they had big time marital problems that they ended up making right. He and his wife had marital problems. They made up, and they've been married now for over 40 years. He says the success behind his long marriage is you got to respect your wife. He says he's never stepped out on his wife, not even once. And he said it's been this, and we still go out on dates. He was criticized one time saying that they had a death pact, thinking that, okay, now here we go again. Alice Cooper and his wife are going to commit suicide and die together. What he meant was, look, we do everything together. We're always together. If we die in a plane crash, we're probably going to die together. But again, what he did was he would take what people said and misquoted him, let him run with it for a while, and sometimes make it right, and sometimes not. In 2015, Cooper premiered with a group called the Hollywood Vampires. It was Alice Cooper, Johnny Depp, Joe Perry, and a few others. Paul McCartney guest starred on the album. So it was kind of a super group, kind of a novelty item. In 2017, he came out with his 20th solo studio album called Paranormal. It had good reviews. Easter Sunday, because remember, by now, okay, maybe I didn't mention this, but by now, after his alcohol abuse and drug abuse, Alice Cooper became a born-again Christian. And he began performing on Broadway. Jesus Christ Superstar. He played the role of King Herod. In fact, Easter Sunday 2018, NBC did a live performance of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Jesus Christ Superstar, and Cooper played the voice, the part of King Herod. 2 good reviews. He released another studio album, his 21st, Detroit Stories, in 2021. Rod Zombie is his good buddy. In fact, Rod Zombie claimed that his first metal moment was seeing Alice Cooper on Don Kirshner's rock concert. Rod Zombie also claimed to have been heavily influenced by Cooper's costumes, and that kind of went over into that genre. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Again, Cooper was married to the same woman forever. He still is. And he says that, again, the secret to a good marriage is don't cheat on your wife, do stuff together, and go on dates on Saturday night. During an interview with Johnny Walker on BBC Radio 2, that was in September 2007, Cooper said he was not a Christian when he gave up drinking, but stated that he thanks God for taking it away from him. And then said, if he, being God, can part the Red Sea and create the universe, he can certainly take alcoholism away from somebody. Now, Cooper originally did not speak publicly about his religious beliefs, but does now. He's very vocal about his faith as a born-again Christian, but continues the whole rock genre thing, shock rock. In other words, it's just an act. It's kind of like you can't hate an actor for playing the role, okay? And this is just playing a role. In fact, during interviews, if you notice, Alice Cooper refers to himself in the third person. Because again, that's not him, that's the act. So, I mean, Alice Cooper to me is definitely one of the most defining rock and roll artists. His band albums, studio albums, I mean, they've spanned from 1969 to 2021, 52-year span, and he's still going strong. In fact, they asked him, how long are you going to perform? He said, well, put it this way. Mick Jagger is 6 years older than me, and he's still performing. My goal is to continue to perform a little bit more than 6 years after Mick Jagger retires, because he wants to be the longest performing rock star. His tours, he started touring in 1968. He's still touring today. 55 years he's been touring. His net worth, $50 million. And you think to yourself, I mean, $50 million is a lot of dough. But when you figure that Bob Dylan's worth over $500,000, Paul McCartney's worth over $1 billion, Herb Alpert is worth almost $1 billion. Neil Sedaka is worth about $800 million. How come Alice Cooper's only worth $50 million? And there's a reason for that. Because while Alice Cooper has been around for a long time, and while he's been performing for a long time, he always had a niche crowd. Alice Cooper never performed in 50,000-seat stadiums. Today he performs at the Stiefel Theater that holds about 3,000. He never appealed to the big crowd. He was never an Elton John. He was never a Paul McCartney. But he keeps on going. And he's still worth $50 million, which is no small feat at all. Well, that's it. We're done. Hope you enjoyed the Alice Cooper You Never Know podcast. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your email address. I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication, and you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.